Tears were falling down my husband's face. His childhood dog had just passed away. A slow, agonizing decline that had finally reached its heartbreaking conclusion. He was devastated. I stepped forward, wrapping my arms around him to provide the quiet, steady comfort that only a partner can offer in the darkest of moments. And then, a shadow moved. My mother-in-law. She did not offer a comforting hand. She did not speak a soft word. Instead, she physically wedged herself between us. She shoved her body into the narrow space, forcefully prying my arms away from my grieving husband. She wrapped her own arms around his neck, pulling him tight against her chest. And as he sobbed into her shoulder, she slowly turned her head. She looked me dead in the eyes. "Nothing is going to make you feel better except your mommy's hug." And then, she did the unthinkable. She grinned at me. A slow, calculated, triumphant grin that chilled me to my absolute core. That was the moment I realized. This was never a family. This was a war. When you are young and deeply in love, the world around you seems to be painted in the softest, most forgiving shades of pastel. You do not see the jagged edges of reality. You only see the beautiful illusion that you desperately want to believe in. I was 19 years old when I first met the man who would eventually become my husband. 10 years ago. We were just two kids trying to navigate the complexities of life, holding hands and dreaming of a future filled with nothing but endless possibilities and unconditional support. He was brilliant, kind, and remarkably grounded. But behind every grounded man, there is an origin story. And his origin story was ruled by a matriarch who had built an entire kingdom upon a foundation of absolute psychological control. When I first walked into his childhood home, the atmosphere felt deceptively warm. I wanted so badly to be loved by his family. I wanted to be the perfect girlfriend, the supportive partner, the daughter they always wished they had. But it did not take long to realize that this family operated under a very strict, very terrifying set of unspoken rules. My mother-in-law was the textbook definition of a boy mom. Her sons were not just her children. They were her pristine trophies, her golden idols, flawless beings who could never, under any circumstances, commit a single wrong. My husband had two older brothers who sat upon the highest pedestals imaginable. And then, there was the sister, the only daughter in a house that worshipped masculinity. She was treated like Cinderella before the magical glow-up. While the boys were praised for simply existing, the sister was criticized, marginalized, and constantly reminded of her inherent flaws. The mother-in-law would sit in the living room, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness as she sang the praises of her boys, only to seamlessly pivot into a bitter, venomous rant about her own daughter. It was a chilling dichotomy. A mother who could fiercely love one half of her offspring while completely destroying the self-esteem of the other. Why I did not see this as an immediate, blazing red flag is truly beyond my comprehension today. When you are surrounded by dysfunction and everyone acts as if it is perfectly normal, you start to question your own sanity. I rationalized her behavior. I told myself that every family has its quirks, its strange dynamics, its hidden traumas. I sacrificed my own intuition on the altar of keeping the peace. I smiled through the uncomfortable dinners. I nodded along to the endless monologues about her glorious sons. I tried to shrink myself down so that my presence would not trigger her insecurities. But in a kingdom ruled by a jealous queen, there is no room for another woman. There is no amount of shrinking that can save you. Because the very fact that you exist, the very fact that her son chose to love you, is considered an act of unforgivable treason. And so, the silent war began. Masked behind polite smiles and poisoned cups of tea, the most dangerous predators do not attack you from the front. They invite you in, they pour you a drink, and they slowly poison your mind while pretending to be your closest ally. To try and get closer to me, my mother-in-law deployed a classic tactic of emotional manipulation. Triangulation. One of my husband's older brothers was already married. His wife's name was M, and, according to the gospel of my mother-in-law, M was the devil incarnate. Whenever my husband was out of the room, the mother-in-law would pull me aside, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. She would lean in close, pretending to share a dark family secret meant only for my ears. She told me horrifying stories about M. She claimed M treated her golden son terribly. She said M was unbelievably rude, arrogant, stuck up, and entirely disrespectful to the family hierarchy. I listened, wide-eyed and deeply uncomfortable. I had never personally witnessed M doing any of these terrible things. In fact, whenever we were all together at family gatherings, M seemed perfectly polite, if a little quiet and reserved. But I was young. I was naive. I explained away the discrepancies by assuming that M's alleged cruelty was a private matter, a dark side that she only revealed behind closed doors when the rest of the family wasn't watching. I believed the matriarch. And then, the atmosphere shifted. Suddenly, without any warning or provocation, M started acting strangely towards me. The polite smiles vanished. The casual greetings were replaced by cold, hard stares. Whenever I entered a room, M would abruptly leave. If I tried to initiate a conversation, she would give me one-word answers, her tone dripping with an icy disdain that I could not understand. A heavy, suffocating cloud of animosity settled over the two of us. We were the only two daughters-in-law in this bizarre empire, yet we felt like sworn enemies on a battlefield. I was completely baffled. What had I done? Why did she suddenly hate me with such a fiery passion? I retreated. I mirrored her coldness. If she was going to hate me for absolutely no reason, I was not going to beg for her friendship. We spent years existing in this toxic dance of mutual avoidance and silent resentment. Every family holiday was a masterclass in walking on eggshells. We sat at opposite ends of the dining table, exchanging hostile glances while the mother-in-law sat at the center, practically glowing with satisfaction. She loved the tension. She thrived on the division. As long as M and I hated each other, we could never unite against her. We felt as though we had to despise one another just to stay in the good graces of Mommy Dearest. It was a brilliant, deeply evil strategy. She had successfully isolated the only two outsiders in the family, ensuring that we would never compare notes, never share our experiences, and never uncover the massive web of lies she had spun to keep her throne secure. But lies, no matter how carefully constructed, always have an expiration date, and the foundation of her empire was about to crack. 5 years. 5 long, exhausting years of fake smiles, whispered rumors, and a fabricated rivalry that slowly drained the life out of both of us. But time has a funny way of wearing down walls. As my husband and I grew older, our relationship matured, and my presence in the family became permanent. Slowly, the ice between M and me began to thaw. It started with small things. A shared glance of exhaustion when the mother-in-law went on another one of her narcissistic rants. A quiet moment in the kitchen, washing dishes side by side. A tentative text message about a family recipe. We were both exhausted from the constant hostility. We both longed for that sisterly relationship, a bond we never thought was possible because of the toxic cloud hanging over the family. Eventually, the polite texts turned into real conversations. And those conversations grew deeper, reaching into the dark corners of our shared experiences in this nightmare of a family. We decided to meet up, just the two of us, away from the watchful, paranoid eyes of the matriarch. We sat across from each other in a quiet cafe, the air thick with apprehension. M looked at me, taking a deep breath before asking a question that shattered reality. Did you really tell her that I was trying to ruin your wedding? I froze. My jaw practically hit the table. What? No, I never said anything like that. Did you really tell her that my husband was settling for me? Now it was M's turn to look horrified. No, I would never say that. The silence that followed was deafening. It was the sound of 1,000 puzzle pieces violently snapping together. We started putting 2 and 2 together. We laid out every rumor, every whispered secret, every accusation the mother-in-law had ever fed us. She made it all up. Every single word. She had fabricated entirely fake conversations, attributing malicious quotes to me and feeding them to M. Then, she would turn around and invent cruel comments from M to feed to me. She had single-handedly engineered a 5-year war between two women who simply wanted to be friends. The sheer magnitude of her deception was breathtaking. It was psychotic. When the initial shock wore off, something incredible happened. We started laughing. It started as a small chuckle and erupted into full-blown, tear-inducing laughter. We laughed at the absolute absurdity of the situation. We laughed at the ridiculous, cartoonish villainy of our mother-in-law. To my immense satisfaction, Mommy Dearest hated this new development. When she realized that her two targets had finally united, she panicked. She tried much harder to pit us against each other, spinning wilder, more desperate lies. But her spell was broken. We would meet up for coffee, share the latest unhinged thing she had said, and laugh until our sides hurt. Unfortunately, the damage to M's marriage had already been done. Her husband, the golden boy, was too deeply enmeshed in the toxicity. M and his brother are no longer married today. But honestly, I am so incredibly happy for her. She escaped a deeply toxic situation, leaving behind a man who was no better than his manipulative mother. M got her freedom, but I was still inside the walls. And the war was about to escalate. Once the illusion of the perfect family shatters, the true madness reveals itself in full force. With M gone, the mother-in-law needed a new target for her unhinged paranoia. And that target became her own husband, my father-in-law. Their relationship had always been volatile. For as long as my husband could remember, they had been mentally, physically, and financially abusive to each other. It was a hurricane of toxicity that destroyed everything in its path. During one particularly explosive argument, the mother-in-law finally crossed a line. She kicked my father-in-law out of the house. He had nowhere to go. No family willing to take him in. So, he ended up living in his car, parked in a random lot across from his best friend's house. Despite the chaos, my husband still loved his father. They bonded over cars, fixing them, buying them, flipping them. It was their shared language. So, one afternoon, my husband bought 2 coffees, and we drove to that depressing parking lot to visit his dad, just to talk about a car he was looking into flipping. We were standing there, having a normal, peaceful conversation. Suddenly, tires screeched. The mother-in-law's car swerved into the parking lot. She threw the door open and marched toward us like a woman possessed. "You are picking him over me," she screamed at my husband, her face red with irrational fury. My husband stood his ground. "He is my father. I am allowed to have a relationship with him. If you don't like it, you can cut me off." She lunged forward, getting right in my husband's face, screaming absolute nonsense. The tension was suffocating. I stepped in. I put my arm between them, a physical barrier against her madness. "Back off. Things are getting too heated." She stopped. She looked at me, and in her twisted, delusional mind, the entire narrative shifted. Who was at fault for this explosive fight? Me. She later told my husband that I was an evil mastermind, actively driving a wedge between a mother and her precious son. But the delusions did not stop there. They got darker. Because I always needed a reliable vehicle, my husband frequently asked his dad to help fix my cars. One day, the father-in-law suddenly refused to help. Why? Because the mother-in-law had accused him of sleeping with me. She genuinely claimed that his willingness to fix his daughter-in-law's car was proof of a sordid, incestuous affair. It was sickening. Her paranoia was all-consuming. There was a local coffee shop they visited daily. If a barista smiled at the father-in-law, he was sleeping with her. If he said thank you for his coffee, he was sleeping with her. She lived in a constant state of fabricated betrayal, and her venom extended to my marriage. We live in a freezing climate. For Christmas, my husband proudly saved up and installed a remote start in my car. It was a $400 gift. He was so excited to show his parents. When he told his mother how much it cost, her face contorted in pure disgust. "And you think she is worth spending $400 on?" She sneered. You could have spent some of that on me. That was the moment the trap was fully set. Not by me, but by her. She was building her own cage of isolation, brick by delusional brick. And I was perfectly content to watch her lock herself inside. There is a specific moment in every psychological war where you simply stop fighting. You do not surrender. You just realize that your opponent is fighting ghosts, and you have no obligation to participate in their haunting. For me, that moment arrived disguised as a tragedy. It brings us back to the day the childhood dog passed away. A year ago, the dog had been sick for a long time, but the mother-in-law, entirely disconnected from reality, refused to accept it. When the terrible decision was finally made to put the poor animal to sleep, the house felt like a tomb. My husband broke down. I stepped in to hold him, to be the anchor he needed in a sea of grief. And that is when the matriarch made her final, desperate play for dominance. She shoved me aside. She physically wedged herself between a grieving husband and his supportive wife. She wrapped her arms around him like a territorial predator, claiming its kill. Nothing is going to make you feel better except your mommy's hug. And then, that sickening, victorious grin. In the past, that grin would have filled me with rage. It would have made me want to scream, to fight back, to defend my place in my husband's life. But in that exact moment, looking into her manic, triumphant eyes, I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness, just a profound, chilling clarity. She was pathetic. She was a deeply broken woman who had to weaponize a family pet's death just to feel relevant. She had chased away her daughter-in-law. She had alienated her husband to the point of homelessness. She had poisoned her own mind with delusions of infidelity. And now, she was desperately clinging to her son, terrified that my love was somehow a threat to her existence. At this point, I fully accepted the reality of the situation. Nothing I do will ever be enough for her. And more importantly, I am completely done trying. I withdrew my energy from her entirely. I stopped trying to win her over. I stopped caring about her opinions, her passive-aggressive insults, her delusional accusations. I became a ghost to her madness. The ultimate revenge in a pro-revenge scenario is not always a fiery explosion. Sometimes, it is the absolute withdrawal of your emotional labor. It is letting the toxic person drown in the poison they brewed themselves. I am incredibly lucky. My husband is absolutely nothing like her. He saw the grin. He saw the manipulation. And he always, without fail, stands firmly by my side. He protects our boundaries like a fortress. I am so deeply grateful that I have a partner who is willing to stand up to the matriarch, because I know that is a rare trait in men raised by women like her. Her empire is crumbling. Her golden boys are realizing the truth. And I am sitting comfortably in the beautiful life I built with the man I love, far away from the toxic reach of a boy mom who lost her own war. The curtain has fallen. The show is over.